In Module 2, Lesson 5, we're going to start looking at subtraction of integers and other rational numbers. And we're going to start it by playing the integer game a little differently. I'm going to model a sample table with sample numbers so that you have a good understanding of what we're doing, and then most certainly it would be a good exercise for you to play the integer game with at least a couple of friends or people in your family to get a better understanding of the concept. So initially, you would be getting 4 cards, and then you'll follow the steps for each round of play. So if we started, for example, if we started in round 1 and you had a total of 12 in your cards, and then, for example, you may have selected the number 3, that would increase your hand to 15. Your score, as a description, your score or your total increased by 3. Then in action 2, see, in action 1 you're picking a card. In action 2 you are going to discard or throw out one of your cards. So if we were to discard a 10, the result would be that we now have 5, because 15 minus 10 is 5. And the description of that is that our score, or our total, decreased by 10. Then going to round 2, we start with 5. That's what we had at the end of round 1. And suppose we selected a -1. That would mean the result of that play would give us a 4. And our description is that our score, or our total, decreased by 1. If we then discarded a +4, that would mean that the result was that we got to 0. Our score decreased by 4. Moving on to round 3, our total again, which is repeated from the result in our last round, was 0. If we then selected or picked up a -7, the result would be that our total would be -7. 0 plus -7 is -7. And our score actually decreased by 7 because we were working with a negative number. If we then discarded a -2, if we have -7 and we throw away -2, we would still have -5 left over. So our score actually increases by 2. And we'll do one more round. If we start at -5 and we select a 1, we would end up with -4, and our score will have increased by 1. And then if we discard a -7, that would mean that we end up at 3. So our score has increased by 7. Our discussion in class will include a more in-depth, but I do want to have a short model of the discussion with you in this video so that you can think through. How did selecting the positive value cards change the value of your hand? When you bring in or add in a positive value card, it increases the value of your hand. In question 2, how did selecting negative value cards change the value of your hand? Remember, selecting means that we are adding that card into our hand. So when you add in a negative value card, it decreases the value of your hand. Question 3, how did discarding positive value cards change the value of your hand? Well, when you throw away or give away a positive value, it will decrease the value of your hand. And likewise, when you discard a negative value card, it will increase the value of your hand. So what operation reflects selecting a card? Selecting the card would be adding. You are adding in a card to your group. And discarding or removing a card is the same as subtracting. So based on the game, we would need to make a prediction about what happens to the result when you subtract a positive integer. And looking back and thinking back to what we did, if you subtract a positive integer, the result is going to be a lower value, a lesser value. However, if you subtract a negative integer, remember when you discard a negative number from your cards, it's actually going to increase the value or the total of your cards. So subtracting a negative actually increases your total. So if we look at it on a number line, if we had two cards, we had a 4, and then we have 2 more, we would be gaining 2 more and getting to 6. But if we take that 2 and we now remove it, what we're really doing is going back. So we have our original arrow that is taking us 4 units, and we had added the 2 units onto that, but now if we discard that or take away that 2, we're simply left with the 4 that we started with. And we can also see that the result is really the same. The result of subtracting 2 is really the same as adding a negative 2. 4 plus 2 minus 2 means that we originally added that 2 on, and then we took that 2 away, and we end up with 4. But if we look at the next example, and this is actually putting the whole thing together, if we started with 4 and we added 2 on, and then we added a negative 2, that negative 2 would also reduce our total by 2 in the same way that subtracting 2 did in the first example. Let's show it with the arrows just to be sure that we know what we're looking at. So if we had our original arrows, 4 plus 2, and then we discarded that 2, we would end up at 4. And likewise, if we have 4 plus 2, which gets us to 6, plus negative 2, we can see on the number line that the representations are exactly the same. So we can say that removing or discarding a positive card changes the score in the same way as selecting a card whose value is the additive inverse. Or opposite. And we continue with example 3. Please remember to follow along and complete your diagrams in the same way that I'm completing them here. So we'll start with a 4. And then we're going to add a negative 2. And the result of adding negative 2 will get us to 2. Removing a negative card, we're going to take a look at what we do with that. This is similar to what we did the last time. So if we start with 4, and then we added a negative 2, that would take us back to 2. But if we removed that negative 2, if we subtract the negative 2, that would mean that we take this arrow and we make it go away. And that would actually have the effect of increasing our total because we had decreased it with the negative 2. But now if we subtract away or discard that negative 2, we're actually increasing our value. And that takes us back to 4. So if we model one more problem, starting with 4, then adding in a negative 2, and then adding a 2, because remember from our last play where we added a negative 2, we were at 2. And if we then add a positive 2 to that, that will land us again on 4. So we can see that removing or discarding a negative card changes the score in the same way as selecting a card whose value is the additive inverse or opposite. In this case, adding the corresponding positive So our rule for subtraction, and I will ask you to write it in your own words and really give detail, but our rule for subtraction is that subtracting a number is the same as adding its additive inverse or opposite. Now we need to practice. Exercises 1 and 2. Using the rule of subtraction, we want to rewrite the following subtraction sentences as addition sentences and then solve them. If you need a number line for these problems, please draw the number line and show with the arrows. It's extremely important that you grasp the concept before we start to move on. So in question A, we would rewrite this subtraction problem as 8 plus -2. And then if we solve that, we get 6. In question B, we will rewrite this subtraction problem as 4 plus -9, which gives us -5. In question C, we would rewrite this one as -3 plus -7, which gives us -10. And then in question D, we would rewrite it as -9 plus -2. Because the additive inverse of -2 is +2. We change this to addition, remember? And we are adding the additive inverse. This is when it gets a little tricky sometimes. -2 plus -9 plus 2 is -7. On this problem, if you're still a little confused, draw the number line so that you can see that when we go 9 units below 0, when we go to -9, and then we subtract away a -2. If we had a hand in our integer game and we had a total of -9, and we took a -2 away from that, we would be back at -7. In exercise 2, we're going to extend that and just find some differences. I'm just going to provide you with some answers along the way. -2 minus -5, if we change that to addition and add the additive inverse, we would be doing -2 plus 5, which is 3. In question B, we would change that to 11 plus 8, which is 19. And in C, we would change that to -10 plus 4, which is -6. In question 3, you're asked to write 2 equivalent expressions that would represent an airplane flying at an altitude of 25,000 feet, and a submarine dives to a depth of 600 feet below sea level. What is the difference in their elevations? So we could write it as a subtraction problem and then also as an addition problem. If we have 25,000 feet, and then we subtract -600 feet, because a submarine diving below sea level is represented with a negative number. If we were to write that equation, we could then also rewrite it as 25,000 plus 600. And our final answer would be 25,600 feet. Pay particular attention to the lesson summary because it will help you develop your subtraction rule in your own words. The rule for subtraction: subtracting a number is the same as adding its opposite. Removing or subtracting a positive card changes the score in the same way as adding in a corresponding negative card. And removing or subtracting a negative card makes the same change as adding the corresponding positive card. That may sound rather confusing, but playing the game a few more times is probably going to help a lot. And drawing a lot of these problems on the number line until you can really understand what's going on will also help. For all rational numbers, subtracting a number and adding it back gets you back to where you started.